My name is Joseph Flowers, but I typically go by Joey. I'm a senior here at West Virginia University, and I'm a human nutrition and foods major. Once I graduate, I plan on completing my dietetic internship program because my goal is to become a dietitian. I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio. If I had to describe myself, I'd say I'm a giant sports fanatic, especially when it comes to West Virginia sports and Cleveland sports. Here's a picture of myself as well as a picture of me and my friends on a trip to Toronto, Canada. Were potatoes the only reason that over 1 million of the Irish population died, or were there other outside factors causing the famine? Starting in 1846, Ireland was struck with the famine spanning until 1851. Here are the causes of the Ireland potato famine of the 1840s. To say the famine was devastating would be an understatement. The famine caused approximately 1 million Irish deaths, another million emigrating the country seeking food and shelter, and eviction of hundreds of thousands of tenant farmers. Even after the famine officially ended, malnutrition still plagued the country for many years. What could have caused such a troubling famine? The answer is the potato crop. The potato crop was the most important food to the Irish, and once it was hit by disease, the Irish were in trouble. While it is easy to say the potato crop was the entire reason for the famine, it is simply not true. There is much more to the famine than people think. The crop failure is only half the issue. The Ireland potato famine in the 1840s was caused by potato late blight, the British government, and mass immigration and population decline. The potato was essential to the Irish diet. It could grow in poor soil, which is beneficial because Ireland had very poor soil. The potato is also very nutritious. It contains iron, protein, carbohydrates, and vitamin C. An adult male would consume an average of 13 to 14 potatoes a day and not much else. It was the main factor of Ireland's mass population growth of the time period. But being so reliant on a single crop, it is easy to see why a disease in that crop would start to cause some issues. Potato late blight is the disease that made the potatoes unconsumable. Also known as Phytophthora infestans, it is a pathogen found in plants and is believed to have originated from the Americas. It is also a water mold and typically thrives in cool and moist weather. Unfortunately, that's the type of weather Ireland had in 1845. A large portion of the Irish population were poor, especially in the rural farm areas. The potato is almost the exclusive crop consumed. Starting in 1846, the late blight started to rot and destroy the potatoes. In the following years, the same occurred. It could not be contained. Each year's crop production was almost completely decimated. Corn was imported from the Americas and attempted to be grown, but Ireland's soil and environment could not handle it. The corn all rotted. With famine comes malnutrition. Malnutrition and hunger can cause extreme measures. The Irish would eat nettles that were growing on the graves and even slit farm animals' necks to drink the blood. What does potato late blight cause? Potato late blight destroys the leaves of the plants, the edible roots, the stems, the fruits, and the tubers of the plant. The damaging effects of the disease can still be seen. It is still a threat to crops today, with a global total of over $6 billion being spent yearly to combat it. It is said to be the most negatively impacting plant pathogen to date. Although potato late blight damaged the potatoes, the British government is responsible for the famine as well. The British government's greed and lack of support to Ireland is arguably just as much to blame. While Ireland and its people were starving during the famine, Britain still had Ireland exporting food to them, food that the Irish would have benefited from tremendously. They were being forced to export grains, meat, and other high-quality foods. The Irish could not afford to purchase the food their own farms grew. In a time of need, the British remained self-focused. Britain didn't do much when it came to supplying food. They exported cornmeal to Ireland, but the people were not fond of it and often refused to eat it. Becoming reliant on the cornmeal also led to nutritional deficiencies. The British Poor Law enacted in Ireland also very negatively impacted them. The British Poor Law sent able-bodied workers to workhouses. These workers were typically poor and living in poverty, and while being sent to workhouses, the workers were no longer being given any famine relief. Hungry and starving people are no longer being supplied with food and were being sent to workhouses for things that didn't even benefit their country. Arguably the worst thing Britain had done during the famine was the mass evictions by absentee landowners. An absentee landowner is someone who rents out a property but does not live on the property. The British owned the land the Irish farmers rented out. Many of the farmers were poor and living in a time of crisis. Because of this, the farmers were unable to pay their rent. Because the farmers were not paying their rent, the landowners were not making money. This caused the landowners to evict hundreds of thousands of Irish tenant farmers and laborers. These farmers lost their source of income, and they lost their homes and livelihood. Interestingly, it is also said that the upper class was okay with the famine and its effects. The famine was predictable by the upper class and almost welcome to bring down the high birth rates of the country. The British viewed the Irish as flawed. The actions of the British had devastating short-term effects, but equally as harsh long-term effects. The lack of food and for many shelters caused mass immigration and population decline that would impact Ireland for decades to come. The estimated population before the famine was 8.4 million. By the time the famine ended, the population was an estimated 6.6 million. 1 million of those were deaths, while the other million were immigrations. Ireland's population never got back to those numbers, as there's only 4.9 million today. Most of the immigrations were to the United States. This graph does a good job of showing just how many people actually migrated from Ireland to the U.S. In 1843, the amount of people was less than 60,000, but by 1852 it skyrocketed to over 200,000 people. Among the immigrants, a large majority were the evicted farmers and laborers. No longer having a home, they left the country not only to seek food, but to seek a better life. This caused a lack of agricultural workers in the country for the next decade. If there are no farmers left, who can take care of the crops? Many of the Irish landowners also left the country. This led to their land being purchased by the British and having the concentration of land in fewer hands. More British-owned land caused more to be used for animals for food to be exported back to Britain. Following the famine, there was a decline in birth rates as well. One obvious reason was there was far less people, but another reason was malnutrition. Being malnourished while pregnant has severe impacts on the baby's health. Maternal malnutrition has an increased risk of premature babies, low birth rate babies, obstructed labor, and even the death of the child. Being pregnant and suffering from anemia increases the odds of infant mortality. The women that were to get pregnant after the famine were still malnourished and encountered many of these problems. The population today is barely half what it used to be during the 1840s. The Ireland potato famine was caused by potato-late blight, the British government, and mass immigration and population decline. But despite what caused the famine, it was an absolute tragedy and something to be remembered. A reliance on a single crop is a dangerous game, and this is proven by the famine. Like all history, the famine is something important to learn about so we can learn from our mistakes and avoid them in the future. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.